we need to make sure that parents are working on their own lives and showing kids what a thriving adult looks like. And that can get hard when you're so involved and like your whole life is about parenting. Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. Dr. Laurie Browne has been the Director of Research for the American Camp Association since 2016. In this episode of the podcast, I interview Laurie about the 5-year Camp Impact Study being done by an external research team through the University of Utah. The study explores the lasting impacts and the ways camp experiences prepare young people for college, their careers, and their lives beyond camp. The study has 3 major components, one focused on youth, one on staff, and one that explores leadership development through CIT programs and other staff recruitment strategies. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Laurie and learn more about the incredible research that's finding that camp truly does have an amazingly positive impact on the development of young people. I'm thrilled today to have Laurie Browne on the podcast. She is the Director of Research for the American Camp Association. Welcome, Laurie.
Well, hi, Audrey. So excited to be here.
So I really wanted to have you on to talk about this really exciting 5-year impact study that you are just beginning on behalf of ACA. Can you talk a little bit about the study and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, the study's big, and we're actually almost halfway through. It's a 5-year study. We're about 2.5 years into the study. The study was funded and kind of framed out by a board task group of volunteers for our national board that said, what do we need to know about camp to really ensure that camps thrive into the 21st century and make sure that we're serving more campers and in better ways. And the big question that they determined that we have yet to answer is, what are the lasting impacts of camp? And what is the interplay between camp and school and home and future jobs? And really looking at camp in the context of youth development, understanding that kids are growing and learning everywhere they go. And we want to know camp's role in what we're calling the learning landscape. So that was really at the heart of the study. As with all ACA research, we understand that we are way too excited about camp to do our own research. So we issued a request for proposals and identified a research institution who's actually at the helm that happens to be the University of Utah, which is exciting for me because they're my neighbor. I live right around the corner. So we have a team at the University of Utah that has kind of framed out the study and is currently doing the data collection and analysis. It's a multi-layered study. I won't go into all of the details, but I think what's important to take away is that the study builds on itself. So we started with qualitative approaches, interviews, and then distilled what we learned in those interviews into a survey to quantify some of those findings. And then we're now using that kind of quantitative evidence as the basis for a longitudinal study. So we're actually tracking campers and their families over time, over multiple years, and over the course of the year. So looking at camp and school, and like I said, sort of the interplay between those. Also important to note that we are collecting data from campers, I said families, but also staff and emerging leaders, counselors in training, and sort of that really interesting age group. So we're really trying to cover the whole gamut of the camp experience.
Well, it is so exciting for all of us in the camp industry because those of us who are so close to it have heard so much anecdotal evidence, over our years from people who will tell us things about how camp changed their life and how it was the best part of their childhood and how they wouldn't be doing the job that they're doing today or living the life they're living if it weren't for camp. And so we hear all these things as camp professionals. But I think I can see why people who aren't within our industry would be skeptical, because I think the view or the cultural view of summer camp is kind of dismissive. It's sort of like, oh, it's this side experience, definitely not something that's necessary. So, wow, we are so excited that you are actually looking into this and finding out really what camp experiences are doing for kids and for the counselors. So it's really exciting that you're doing this work.
It's exciting, and the timing is pretty cool because, we've been doing camp research for a long time. We've known for generations that camp does great things for kids. But I think the environment is far more ready for the type of outcomes that camp provides. And by outcomes, I mean the social emotional learning related outcomes. We've known for 100 years that camp promotes things like relationship skills, but only now are we seeing in the education space and the mental health space and college and career readiness space the value of relationship skills. We literally have employers saying that is the number one skill that they expect for college graduates are relationship skills, and that is harder and harder to find. And so I think the environment is right for camp to really promote its value proposition, which are some of these outcomes that we're finding. And we now know that not only does camp promote these outcomes, but they stick. They last, and kids are using them to thrive in school and in early jobs and in their lives outside of camp.
Oh, that's so exciting. And it's very much in line with what I've been seeing. And I did some research a few years ago for a thesis, and what ended up coming to the surface was social skills and friendship skills as one of the most important outcomes for kids at camp, which leads to that, great, more positive relationships and more friendships and all that good stuff. What I always like to tell parents is other places, school, sports, they have another focus that's their most important priority, whether it's academics or sports skills. But at camp, or at least at kind of traditional, well-run, accredited camp programs, our number one focus is on the community building, the culture building, and training our counselors to facilitate friendships and relationships among campers. And so it's really exciting to see that we are now going to have tangible data from your study or the Utah study that is going to really prove, like you said, the value that camp experiences have in the whole landscape of a child's life.
Absolutely. And it all layers on top of one another, and again, I keep going back to this word, the interplay between camp and school and other spaces, that all the spaces work together to create a thriving, successful child. And now we know that camp plays a very unique and I would say critical role in that overall landscape. It is exciting, and a lot more to come on that too.
Sure. Well, one of the fun things, and I know this is very early in the findings, but one of the things that you have recently kind of started looking into is many of the parents who have been in the qualitative study have mentioned the impact of their child's camp experience on them as a parent. Can you speak a little to that?
Sure. Well, this is a new phase of the study. Like I said, that we've had several phases, and each phase has built on itself. And the focus up until now has largely been on former campers. So emerging adults who went to camp as a kid, and they've been reflecting back on the value of camp, what they learned at camp, and how they're using that now in college, in their early careers, and as young adults. But now we've shifted into this, what I call a longitudinal portion, meaning we're tracking campers. Specifically, last year they were recruited into the study as 9 and 10-year-olds, but we recruited them with their parents and or caregivers. We want the family for a couple of reasons. One is we want, young kids have a hard time articulating the value of camp, so we want the parents there to help facilitate that dialogue, but also we're interested in the family dynamic around camp. How do families as a unit choose to go to camp? How do they prioritize camp? How do they integrate camp with other things in their lives? So yes, we're talking to parents, and the parents themselves were not initially an area of focus in the study, but really are emerging as their own kind of beneficiary. And, we're seeing that parents have their own outcomes related to camp. And this is somewhat intuitive, but to see it play out with such a large sample and such a large national sample, we're specifically having parents share with us the value, the benefits to them to sending their kids to camp. And I would say this is day camp and overnight camp. parents are recognizing that kids come home and are, in many cases, more active citizens in the family. And so it improves family processes when they send their kids to camp. But specifically in overnight camp experiences, parents are saying, I'm a better parent. I get some time to connect with my partner, to engage in some of the things I don't always do when I'm busy caretaking all the time. And then when my kid comes back, oftentimes having been in nature or been physically active and connecting with other kids come back, really happy. And so as a family unit, that brings all kinds of benefits to parents as well. So again, this is a bit unexpected, but something we're really excited to follow up on. We're tracking over 500 families for 3 years. And so we'll be able to see, kind of dig into this notion of the benefits to parents of sending their kids away to camp.
That's amazing. I wonder too, and this is just my speculation from my own camp experience, but I wonder if part of the benefit for parents is that for many of them, it's the very first time that they've really had their child away from them. And I'd say at day camp as well, without cell phones, without that kind of constant access. And so I've heard from many parents, it's somewhat of a relief to know that their child is taken care of. They can relax. They don't need to be monitoring, following, texting, all of that. And so it's a much needed break for parents who feel so much pressure to be so involved with everything, looking at the grades, looking at this, looking at that. So I think it must be a little bit of a relief. And like you said, I think for so many parents who are working and taking care of their kids, their life is so busy and so full that what often gets neglected is their own well-being and sort of what brings them happiness. One of the things I always tell parents when their kids are at camp, and especially for the first time and they're nervous and they're feeling like, oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this? To use that time for your own kind of camp type well-being experience. Be with your friends, go out with your spouse or, do hobbies that you haven't had time to do so that when your kid comes home and has all these great things to share about what they've done that's new, you can say, well, you know what? I got my sewing machine back out, or I've been cooking, or I've met my friends for book club. So I think that's another thing is we need to make sure that parents are working on their own lives and showing kids what a thriving adult looks like. And that can get hard when you're so involved and like your whole life is about parenting.
Absolutely. And how exciting that our world is far more comfortable with this idea of self-care and this idea of happiness being something that we have to cultivate. And we have to cultivate it by doing things other than work and caregiving. It's an investment in our own well-being, and we are better parents when we make that investment. And I think for so long, and still today, but for so long, there's been a stigma, or we've been afraid to say things like, yeah, I kind of enjoy some time away from my kids. Especially as mothers, I think we're really inclined to really set aside our own well-being for our kids. But like I said, there's now so much dialogue around the importance of that time away from kids. And to know that your child is thriving because they're apart from you. This is literally one of the findings that we see. And again, this is a little bit more specific to the overnight camp space, but the opportunity for kids to practice independence and from that develop a true sense of responsibility. And not just that they do their chores, but they see themselves as a responsible contributor to their family, to their community, and they get to practice that at camp. And that cannot happen in the, kind of the day-to-day, family. They need to go away to practice that in a new way. Mm-hmm. And so there are benefits to parents and campers to that time apart.
Hey, podcast listeners. I want to just take a quick break from my interview with Laurie to talk about my new book, Happy Campers: 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. If you're listening to this episode on the day that it comes out, which is May 10th, then you are listening to this episode the very week that my book came out on Tuesday, May 7th. So I'm really excited and I hope that you'll check it out. The website for my book is happycampersbook.com. And I'm just going to read you a little bit from the front flap that's a description of the book. Our screen-obsessed, competitive society makes it harder than ever to raise happy, thriving kids. but there are tried and true methods that can help. Instead of rearing a generation of children who are overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, and who struggle to become independent, responsible adults, parents can create a culture that promotes the growth of important character traits and the social skills kids need for meaningful, successful lives. Thousands of parents attest to the magical benefits of summer camp for their kids, noting their children return more joyful, positive, confident, and resilient after just a few weeks. But you can learn exactly what it takes to promote these benefits at home. Complete with specific ideas to implement the most effective summer camp secrets, Happy Campers is a one-of-a-kind resource for raising happy, socially intelligent, successful kids. I also just I agree. And I love the whole concept of sort of like the village that's, raising kids together and that we kind of all need each other. And how I often find one of the things that I talk to people about is even if they don't send their kids to camp ever, it's really important to find other adults who can mentor your kids. Because there are some things that your kids either won't do with you there or will be more tentative about trying. But if so like even something like driving, sometimes it's just too hard for a parent to teach their own.
I have a 15-year-old, so
yes,
I get it.
And I think it's okay for parents need to know that they're not supposed to be able to like teach their child everything. And that's what, that's why you have teachers at school. That's why you have sports coaches. That's why you have camp counselors and all these other people. And just for parents to recognize that that's how it's supposed to be. They're not supposed to be like everyone and teaching their child everything. I think that's helpful. I know for me, I've had the blessing of raising my kids at camp and sending them to lots of other camps too. And so much of who my kids are is because of these amazing role models that they've
Absolutely.
had that are, not me, but also all these other people, and how fun for them to get to interact with and learn from other adults. I think that's the other lesson that camp can provide to parents is that you don't have to feel like you're alone in this.
Absolutely. Well, and we know that the adults at camp are often not quite adults.
Yes.
We use the term emerging adults. And in fact, we try not to use young adult anymore because emerging adult connotes that they are on their way. And a lot of the camp counselors are simply younger and more relatable than a lot of the adults that kids encounter in other spaces in their lives. And we now know, we've known this in other studies, but this is coming out in a big way in this impact study, that closeness in age is a really critical opportunity, not just for mentorship, but for kids to see themselves as an emerging adult and maybe even adult. Like they are role models, but they're also close enough in age where it's not so far away. Adults, they just seem, they're adults, but camp counselors, I can see myself as a camp counselor. I can see, as a kid, I can remember how much I related to my camp counselors. And that was a really powerful role.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. Because, parents, as we thought of our parents are out of it. We no longer are relevant to the world. But these camp counselors. So this is a fun story. Last year we had themes at our dances, and one was like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, cool.
And I am not kidding. Out of the camp, there were half of the campers were dressed as camp counselors. And I thought that was really sweet in that to a, 12, 13, whatever, 9-year-old, when they're looking at their future, guess what they're looking at? They're thinking about being an emerging young adult, and what they want to be is a camp counselor. And I thought that is really cool. There were, of course, kids who, had a doctor outfit on or different things. But I remember thinking, I think a lot of people wouldn't think of that as what you would say you want to be when you grow up. But that's how important camp is to these kids, that to them, what they really want to be right now when they look ahead is one of these people who's a role model and leader and great person to be around and a friend and mentor. That's what they want to be when they grow up.
Yeah. No, it's really powerful and it's very close. Camp counselors seem attainable. To become a person like that seems achievable. And we know that that's our calling a mechanism to the camp experience. So one of the dimensions of the study is not just looking at the outcomes and what lasts over time, but what happens at camp to promote those outcomes, because we want all of our camps to understand these mechanisms, these practices, the formula, and there's not one formula, but just these ingredients that go into an impactful camp experience. And camp staff is the overwhelmingly most dominant of those ingredients. We know this now from numerous different approaches that we're doing in the study, that our staff are the ones that are really modeling the outcomes, facilitating opportunities to learn those outcomes, and helping those outcomes to stick over time. So it's a really important dimension of camp.
And it's a huge responsibility for these emerging adults who we put in this role as counselors. And, we always try to instill in them, like, you have no idea the impact that you are having, your words, your actions. They are watching everything you do and they want to be just like you. So it is very powerful. Well, I love that. I think that most camps are finding that our trainings get longer and longer. Like, now I think it used to be that I think might still only be like 5 days, but ours has expanded to 10 days now.
Wow. That's terrific.
Because of all the things that we need to cover with our counselors before we put them with kids and in a group. And so it really is, it's quite remarkable the impact that they have. And I think parents, when they're looking at camps, need to know that you don't need a fancy facility. You don't need fancy equipment. And in fact, if you have that, but not the amazing staff, your child won't have the great experience. It's all about the counselors, how they treat kids, how they work with kids, how focused they are on the kids as their top priority. All of that is far more important than anything else that a camp.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been presenting this at conferences around the country, and camp directors have said, you mean to tell me that in that vendor hall where we have all the fancy equipment that I'm supposed to go and buy, that this is really about my staff? I said, that is absolutely, I can say that with absolute confidence. The data have borne out for a long, long time, but especially in this study, the value of staff. And there's one other thing that we're seeing, and this is largely driven by staff. In fact, I'd say entirely driven by staff, but is a slightly different thing. And that is camp culture. A culture of caring, a culture of inclusiveness, a culture of belonging. It's sort of all the people combined. Like, we have staff and then we have campers, but you put all of that together with the traditions and the norms of the camp, and that creates a culture that in and of itself is so powerful as a mechanism for lasting learning. So, and again, that's not about fancy equipment. That's about intentional culture building. And again, that culture around care and safety and inclusiveness is really what matters.
I'm guessing that you found, or are finding, something that I've found is that kids and counselors use the words like family and a second home quite a lot when they're talking about camp. For some kids and the young adults, it's more like their first home. If they didn't really have a place, a home environment that was great or really supportive. For some of them, it's the first time they've experienced that kind of closeness of community and kind of that family feeling. But for most of them, they and their parents too refer to it as like another kind of part of their family, an extended family kind of.
Yeah.
Are you hearing that?
Absolutely. And what a great opportunity to practice being a member of a community that's not your family. So going to get back again to this separation, especially in adolescence, as kids grow up, they have to be able to see themselves in worlds outside of their home. That's part of the critical developmental process. And if we don't structure that intentionally, they're going to find it some other way, right? They're going to find family outside of their family, however they need to find it, because that is part of their developmental process. But yes, at camp, we see that, we have ample opportunities for practicing being a member of a family or member of a community outside the home in still a very safe and supportive environment.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just love that, I've heard you now speak about the early findings a couple times, and I just love that this relationship piece keeps rising to the top. I don't know if you follow Susan Pinker's work, The Village Effect. She wrote a book and she has a TED Talk. I find myself mentioning it all the time. There's a TED Talk that she did where basically they've studied the blue zones, places where people have like really, they live the most centenarians. And they're finding that it's not about the Mediterranean diet or exercise or anything else, that what rises very much to the top is social connection and relationships.
Absolutely.
So basically they're said that, you can be a smoker with great relationships, and you probably have a better, like the smoking has less of a negative impact than the positive impact of social relationships.
Oh, I've seen that play out in medicine.
Yes. Yeah. So I am just really excited that, your work and all this research and just kind of getting this out to the world, this information, both what camps need to do to further promote these great outcomes, like you said, and to just kind of tell the world about what is happening at camp and this positive impact. And also, I think, what families and schools can learn from camp.
Absolutely. Again, that comes back to that interplay, right? Recognizing that kids are making connections between camp and school and home and all these other spaces. What a great opportunity for us as parents, as educators, as camp professionals to help kind of bring visibility to those linkages, help campers identify the connections between the two. So you learned this at camp. How can you use this at school? I think, yes, absolutely. We've been doing this at camp. And this is one of the things I've been trying to promote to other camps is having kids reflect before they leave camp about what they're going to bring home with them. We've been doing it with our older kids. We have a little graduation ceremony, and we ask them, what have you learned here that you're going to use in your life? And it's really amazing to hear them articulate what they're going to take back. And I think it's good to have kids do that process because they learn these great things, but you need to take the time to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to translate this into the rest of my life, the other weeks of the year beyond camp? So, well, this is so exciting, Laurie. I definitely, as your study, I guess we're halfway in. I didn't realize that already. Yep,
but I'll definitely want to have you back on after it's done.
Please, that would be great.
And let's then follow up, and I will continue to share with my readers and listeners some of the articles you're writing and the early findings and everything else, because I just think this is so exciting just for all of us. And thank you for the incredible work you're doing on this research.
Well, thank you, Audrey. And thanks for, doing this at camp. We talk about research is exciting, but it really doesn't matter near as much as what amazing camp professionals like you are doing with campers and staff every day. And that's where the magic happens. So thank you for doing that important part.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Laurie. I really enjoyed learning more about the 5-year impact study and some of the early findings from the research that is coming out of the University of Utah. You can find show notes and links to many amazing resources from the American Camp Association, including some great videos that they've come out with that show some of the early findings from the research. For all the notes and links from this episode, visit my website at sunshine-parenting.com and search for episode 87. I think it's appropriate to end this episode with a note from a camp parent that I received several summers ago. I use it in the start of the section of my book called The Magic of Summer Camp. Here's what she said. Dear Sunshine, I don't know the child who was returned to me on Saturday. It definitely wasn't the child I dropped off 2 weeks earlier. The only logical explanation is that your camp is magic. Magic transformed my scared, sad boy into a confident, smiling, laughing young man. My son had a hard year in school. He was stressed, worried, and anxious. He came out of his 2 weeks loving the mountains, loving activities he never would have tried in a million years, and, most importantly, believing in himself. He has never been a kid who, in almost 9 years of life, has ever believed in himself despite everything we've tried. And you changed that. Magic. With gratitude, Lindsay.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.